Now to get back into the conversation on the resignation of Nigerian Army personnel. Joining us is the Director, Geneva Centre for African Security and Strategic Studies, Nigeria, David Otto. Good morning once again.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Good morning.
All right. So let's get straight into it. I initially had asked, if this is normal, if we, every now and then would see hundreds of Army personnel resign from any army in the world, or should Nigerians be worried?
Well, I think, if you look at other militaries around the world, this is a normal occurrence. I mean, in the case of Nigeria, where you see hundreds resigning, I looked at other countries like the United Kingdom, where in 2023, which is last year, the UK Army did a survey and found that almost, I think, about 16,000 military personnel quit the army, as opposed to about 10,000 that were conscripted. Well, not conscripted, but recruited into the army. So the same happens with countries like the United States. The reason why I use these examples, it's simply because the Nigerian army is modeled, around these, two global military powers. So it's not surprising or shocking that you would see this high level of resignations.
But the cases you're speaking about, did they occur at the same time?
Yes, so, even the UK government described the number of resignations as a result of low morale. They said, that's the Minister of Defense, the Secretary of Defense in the UK, which is equivalent to the Ministry of Defense. He talked about the fact that, more personnel quit as a result of poor working conditions, troop morale, and of course, this is linked to the welfare. But again, this is not an abnormal occurrence in the military, but internally, often you do not have a one-on-one research on why these military personnel quit. For example, in the case of Nigeria, we don't know. The report did not include, some kind of a research on why the personnel quit. The fact that, it was written that it was as a result of, high level of corruption, low morale and welfare was not based on any research. And this is why I believe that the Nigerian Army, spokesperson had, made it quite clear that, it was kind of spurious and not based on any evidence. But it's always concerning for any military to see a high number of people leaving, because, of course, you want to retain as many military personnel that you have trained over time. You've spent a lot of money to train, but people always, would have a reason to leave, for personal reasons, for family relations, maybe just as a result of the fact that they don't get enough pay. So it's something that, needs to be really investigated by the Nigerian Army, but it's not abnormal. Again, as I repeated, it happens all over the world.
All right. But I worry about what exactly this means for Nigeria's fight against insecurity, especially as this has been an ongoing war for the longest time. So looking at these mass resignations, yes, they're normal. Yes, they happen in different parts of the world. But what does that mean for us? Before these resignations have occurred, did we have enough personnel to be able to combat insecurity in the country? And what would it look like going forward?
Well, I think, if you look at the numbers, the Nigerian Army has one of the largest, capacity in Africa, almost 230 plus, according to its own records. If you look at that in relation to the population size, over 200 million, then, of course, that's not enough. Even the Nigerian Army leadership has said, on several occasions that they need more men. So it's very concerning to see, those numbers resigning, from an internal point of view. The army will not like to see personnel resigning, and of course, perhaps resigning for reasons of, a low morale, corruption as alleged. So I think it's key that, there has to be some level of internal review, for the to look at some of the reasons why, there is a huge exodus, from the military. I mean, with the current insecurity in the Northeast, for example, in the Northwest, across the 6 geopolitical zones, where the military is required to maintain the territorial integrity, peace, and stability, the leadership will be concerned. But what they are effectively saying, the army is not saying that people are not resigning, but what it's saying is that there is no evidence put forward by this report that the reason for resignation by all this personnel is down to low morale and high level of corruption. And I'm not sure that the army is saying that, there is no low morale within the military or there is no corruption within the military. I don't think that's what the military is saying. But they've been very specific that the reason why people have resigned, or this number of military personnel have resigned, there's no evidence that they did so as a result of that. But they will be concerned, of course, because they need these men, and that's why they recruited them and paid for them to be trained.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more, paint a clearer picture of what the reality might be for these soldiers that, of course, have been facing and fighting insecurity for, more than a decade now. What is the reality of their welfare like? And of course, that includes also availability of weapons and equipment to fight, the insurgency in Nigeria. What do you hear that they have to go through or are dealing with?
Well, I mean, welfare has a number of elements that you can look into. For example, you're talking about the salaries that they get. How much do they get paid? Average non-commissioned officers, would be paid roughly about 90,000 naira, plus. I mean, when I say plus, I mean including some of the benefits that the military personnel do have. For non-commissioned officers, I think that rises above 120,000 to 1.5 million to the most senior officers. That's just from a salary point of view. If you compare that to other countries, it's not necessarily the best salary for people that put their lives on the line to protect, man and country. So again, you're experiencing a military that is constantly on the war front, dealing with threats, ranging from insurgencies that have been in the country for over a decade in the Northeast, for example, bandits, in the northwest part of the country, in the middle belt, you have, so the military is constantly, in the case of Nigeria, facing, a high level of threat dynamics, and that requires, a continued review in terms of the state of mind of the military personnel, their welfare. A lot of them get injured. A lot of them are deployed out of the areas where the family members are for a very long time. And this becomes a burdensome and a critical issue when you put it all together. And then sometimes these aspects discourage people who may have joined thinking that the army is a way out, but then of course they get into the army and they find out that the reality on the ground is not the same. You've got to remember that not everyone joins the Nigerian Army or any other military or security agency to serve man and country. Some people see it as a way out of the tough economic situation, and they then join. And once they are in, it becomes a different ball game, and some of them want to leave. So the army cannot stop someone from retiring voluntarily. Of course, there are procedures, that you need to go through in order for you to, resign or hand over a letter of an intention to do so. So the reality sometimes, can be much different than what is being seen. But the bottom line is that most military in the world, and I mentioned the UK and the US, do suffer from low morale, by some military personnel. They do suffer from welfare issues. I mean, it's very normal. But the question is, what is being done by the leadership to address some of these issues? And this is why the army itself, when it denied these allegations, focused on talking about the fact that, the welfare of the Nigerian army in the past year, I mean, in reference to when the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Agbaja, was appointed. They talk about the fact that there has been an improvement in welfare, in the rehabilitation, in housing. Just to be quite clear that of course they understand the dynamics. They now transport troops, to go on holidays and visit their families, because of course, living conditions and family personal relationship has been one of the biggest factors that most men leave the military, because of course they can't see their families. They're deployed for 6 months or more. So the reality is quite, different, when you sacrifice yourself, in the interest of national security and maintaining the internal sovereignty of the state, as a military personnel. But it's never an easy job, and I understand. And for me, it's not a big deal that people are resigning, but I think the military just has to continue to improve on its welfareism and the living conditions of the soldiers.
Yeah.
All right, let's then talk about what we can learn from other climes. You're in the UK. I mean, you've mentioned, like we started the conversation with you stating that this is something that happens around the world. The Punch has a report in its papers that says that about 1,008 of them have left in the past 4 years. So you said how morale is generally low across board. But are there things that we can learn from maybe other more developed climes that we can implement here in ensuring that we can boost morale? What are the things that we need to prioritize for our army?
I think in talking about the subject in question, which is why most military, or why do you see a huge number of military personnel leaving the army? I think it's a question of going down to research. And when I say research, I mean the army needs to be quite open and dig deep into why, the reality of the reasons why people are leaving. I mean, the army has always been a very, a secretive, agency. They do not want to speak much about the internal dealings within the military, and this is why the spokesperson made a point that people resigning is confidential. But of course, it's confidential. But I think the main thing here is, how do you then carry out a proper internal research to find out? Just like in the case I mentioned to you in the UK and the US, where when people do resign, there are avenues that the military goes through to really find out, okay, why are they resigning in huge numbers? What is it that we can do more to maintain our military personnel? Because of course, you spend a lot of money to train them, to recruit them, to deploy them, to keep them in the conditions in which they are, as fit as they are. So it's a huge investment for any security agency, talk less of the Nigerian Army, to maintain this huge number of personnel. I think I mentioned earlier on about 230 military personnel, across the country. So when you begin to lose them in that huge number, the question is, what then are they using those skills for? Are they going somewhere else to, join other agencies, or are they using skills for crime? And when I say skills for crime, I'm talking about the fact that, we've seen situations where maybe ex-military or former security agencies have become involved in crime and criminality after leaving, official service. So, the key lesson here is you really need to dig down, into the real reasons, why they are quitting. If it's low morale, as it is alleged, then of course, the army has to continuously improve the morale. If it's corruption, then you've got to work on corruption. So it's simply, what I call step in, step out. You need to understand why people are doing what they're doing, and you stop them from stepping out of the military. So it's as simple as that. It has to be based on data. You just look at the dynamics of why they're leaving, and you do what you need to do to stop them from leaving.
Yeah,
Not,
all right.
not stop them.
We probably would just hope that the Nigerian government understands, what some of all these things mean with regards to fight against insurgency and insecurity, because, from recent reports, there are parts of northern Nigeria, in Sokoto State and in Zamfara and other places that are fully under the control of bandits and other terror groups. We don't have enough army personnel to fight this war. It has not been properly funded. And so if we have people who are even leaving and we can't recruit enough to join the army, then we are obviously going to have a bigger security problem in the near future. But thanks a lot for joining us, David Otto. We, of course, would have you join us and have a more extensive conversations surrounding security in the near future. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.